Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining me on the planet. For those of you that don't know me, my name is June Allen, and I am the founder of The Art of Greatness at juneallen.net. So today I am going to be talking to you about hiding. Okay, hiding at work. What does it mean? What does it look like, when you're hiding at work? And there are different reasons why we do this, which I will go into. But I hear this a lot. I see the behaviors. I hear people talking about the behaviors and how difficult it is for people to show up at work the way that they really want to. So, an important part of that transformation is to understand what hiding is, what it looks like at work. So then only then are you able to kind of really dig a little bit deeper and find out actually what is the hiding about, what purpose does it serve, and how you can begin to change those behaviors and feel more confident about being visible at work. What do you need to do? What are the rituals? What are the practices that you need to do to be able to do that? Okay, so this is not about laziness. This is not about discipline. This is not about shaming anybody that's doing these behaviors. Okay, because there are reasons why we do this. It's about really understanding and an invitation for you to be really curious about why you do the things that you do. Okay, and when you're doing them and what purpose they serve. Okay, so yeah, I think the first thing to kind of think about is to reframe the whole idea about what hiding is. And, and just to kind of think about that hiding is not always obvious. The way that we hide at work is not always obvious. And actually, hiding is actually quite often very productive. It's very, very productive. We're so busy, 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 busy doing the things that are not going to move us forward. So I think once we can get clarity around that and really begin to name the ways that we're hiding, that's when we can start to change things. Okay. So what I'm gonna share with you today is I'm gonna share four internal parts of ourselves that engage in this behavior, and we'll talk about why and all the rest of it. So yeah, so there's this first part that is this hiding that wants to avoid visibility because visibility is really painful. Okay, for whatever reason, being visible is just too terrifying. Now, there might be layers to this, okay? And, I work with a lot of Black women who struggle with visibility because they have a mother wound. They have a difficult relationship with their mother, which didn't allow them, where actually being visible and being seen by their mother was actually unsafe. It was actually dangerous for a lot of people. So they learned to survive that relationship by hiding. Okay, it became a protective behavior that prevented them from being shamed, being harmed, being ridiculed, all of that stuff. So they learned that behavior from the relationship with their mother, and now it's being played out in their work because visibility then becomes so painful, especially if they're not actively, proactively doing any mother wound work in therapy or coaching or whatever. Then it is going to be very difficult for people to actually show up and be visible at work because they still have that wound there that's being activated. So it becomes like a protective behavior. Your mother wasn't able to see you. It's not safe for you to be seen around your mum or your family. So you carry on that behavior in the workplace because it feels safe. It's protective. Okay. The second part is the part that overworks. Okay. Now, as Black women, as Black people, we are the mules. We are the mules of society. We have been trained to overwork because that gives us a sense of purpose. It makes us feel needed. It makes us feel wanted. It gives us an identity. If I'm always doing stuff for others, it's a way of being seen without actually revealing yourself too much. If we overgive and overwork, um, and this can show up as well as over preparing. Okay. This is how we earn our worth. We over prepare. This is where the perfectionism comes in. It becomes like a compulsive behavior that you're constantly, constantly doing stuff all the time. You're staying busy in low value tasks. Okay. You're staying busy in low value tasks that are not going to move you or your business forward. Okay. That it's not going to move you and your business forward, but you can sort of stay in the um you're unconsciously, I suppose, staying in the denial that, okay, because I'm busy, then I must be doing something. because you are actually doing something, but you're not actually doing the things that are actually going to be moving your business forward. Okay. You're still, it's a form of hiding. You're hiding in the busyness, you're hiding in the low value stuff. You're making yourself think that actually I am doing these things because you are physically busy, you are actually doing stuff, but these are not the things that are going to grow your business. These are not the things that are going to grow your identity. These are not the things that are going to stretch you. These are the things that you're already comfortable with doing. You're comfortable with doing a lot of the busy things that you're doing, but your business and your private practice, your wellness business is not going to grow if you're not actually bringing yourself to that edge. Okay, and this is something that I have found difficult over the years because, and people don't really talk about this enough. They don't really talk about this enough. The fact that, in many ways, there are old identities that need to die. Okay, there are old identities that need to die in order for you to step into the new identities that are going to move you and your business forward. And these are some of the things that I work with clients as part of the coaching process. Because those identities, the identities that got you here are not going to be the ones that are going to take you forward. Those old identities served a purpose, quite often to protect you from being harmed, and that meant shrinking. It meant shrinking, it meant hiding. And, it served a purpose at that time. It maybe served a purpose when you were in your family of origin. It maybe served a purpose when you were in, old workplaces and things like that. But in terms of you moving forward and stepping into your future self, in terms of stepping into your abundance, in terms of stepping into your growth edge, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional and you have to be willing to tell the truth about your own bullshit. I had to tell the truth about my own bullshit, you know? And I'm not saying that to shame myself or to shame you. We have to be honest about the ways that we do things in order to move forward. We have to be, without that honesty, you're going to be stuck. You're going to be stuck in that loop of thinking that the loop of the busyness, and you're going to get frustrated with yourself, and it's going to be hard for you to really understand why you keep doing the things that you're doing if you're not being really intentional about the way that you hide. Yeah. So that's the overworking part, okay? The part that's trying to earn your worth by over preparing. The other thing that I'll say about that as well is that sometimes the overworking part is linked to shame. There's shame attached to the overworking part because you think that, oh my gosh, if I'm not doing all of these things, if I'm not, rescuing, caping for everybody, rescuing everybody, over functioning and all of this, then, you think that you can almost protect yourself from being shamed by somebody else or somebody else thinking that you're not good enough or you're not doing enough or whatever. So you over function and you overworking to try to prevent that. And what that just leads, it just leads to burnout. It just leads to burnout and a lot of resentment and exhaustion. So again, it's important to kind of unpack these behaviors so that we can begin to take care of ourselves in a much, much better way, in a much, much healthier way. Okay, so the third part, okay, um, that hides is the perfectionist. Okay, and again, I put my hand up to this one. I can redo stuff to death. Okay, I can redo stuff to death. Now I have to get myself in a place where I can say, actually, this is good enough. This is good enough. And 9 times out of 10, the thing that I think is not good enough or I think is shit, it's not shit. It's just that there's that part of me that's afraid of being visible, afraid of putting myself out there, afraid of, I suppose, there is a part of me, I suppose, that's afraid of being, if I put the content out there, that it's going to be criticized, especially if it's something that new that I've not really talked about before. And I can start to doubt myself. And so I get into this loop, we can get into this loop of thinking that, I need to tweak it a bit more. I need to do this. I need to do that, and we just have to make it okay with ourselves that it's good enough. Okay, that we have to make it okay with ourselves that it's good enough. And something that I see a lot, and this is something that I've struggled with as well, but this one I hear a lot: the constant learning. the constant, I must do another training, but not launching anything. You're not actually launching what you need to launch. You're constantly learning. It's got to be another podcast. It's got to be another course, another workshop. And so you're constantly always learning because there's that fear that you're not good enough. There's a fear that if I'm visible, that somebody's going to judge you, that you can't really trust what you know is enough, you know? So you're constantly learning, constantly training, constantly overdoing this, just one more training, not trusting your talent, not trusting your gifts. You're always thinking, oh, I just need to do one more. I just need to do one more. I just need to pay for one more. And you never really allow yourself to be seen as you are. You don't allow yourself to be seen as you are because you're trying to perfect the whole thing. One of the reasons why I feel like people really relate to me and what I've done over the years in my business and my private practice is that, even before I became qualified as a therapist, I shared my journey. I started sharing my journey on social media way before I was qualified. So I took my audience on a journey with me. And I think the reason, and I think that they like that because it wasn't perfect, and I wasn't a polished, experienced therapist in that sense. But, I'd been in recovery for a while. I had a lot of self-awareness. And that's kind of what I was sharing about. I was sharing about my journey in recovery and my sobriety and stuff like that. And, in doing that, I was able to start to trust myself a lot more. And people liked the fact that I was just sharing, what was going on for me and stuff like that. And obviously, as I've grown over the years and I've, matured as a therapist and kind of shared more and more of that, it helped to build trust. It helped to build trust with my audience. And so, when my new clients and stuff, they go onto my YouTube channel or go onto my website or whatever, they see the journey that I've taken from, before I was actually doing any before I became a therapist. They see the journey from, 8, 10 years ago or however long it is now. Um, and they're with me. They can see the journey and how I've grown over the years, and so they feel connected to me in that sense. Okay, so that the people pleasing, sorry, the perfectionistic part, the delaying of the action, the constant learning before launching, all of that kind. Again, it's a protective behavior. It's a protective behavior that is trying to protect you from, any pain that you might feel around the anxiety about being judged or being seen or being criticized or being shamed, all of that stuff. Again, these are all protective behaviors. Okay, these are all protective behaviors that are trying to keep you safe from whatever fear. But you're not going to grow unless you experience, you know, if you don't work through these things. And maybe some other people are going to have opinions about what you say, and that's okay. Other people might not have the same opinion as you. I know that my stance on certain things is very, I'm very clear about what I say. I'm very clear about working with black people and, being very anti-oppressive within that context, and I say a lot of stuff that maybe people don't like, and I've kind of accepted that, but that's okay because I know that my work is not for everybody. And, when I first started doing my work in recovery and started doing what I'm doing as well in therapy and all the rest of it, the reason why I'm so firm about those points, about those values in my business, those principles in my business, is because I know that when I went into therapy, like I didn't see those things. When I first started in recovery, I didn't see people talking about racial sobriety and all of that stuff. I didn't see anybody talking about those things. And so I wanted to see my journey, my reflection. I wanted to see my experience as a black queer woman. I wanted to see those things reflected in my healing work, and I didn't really see it. So, I wanted to understand what it was like to, be a business owner who's struggling with the fact that, my parents came from Jamaica and we've got 240 years of enslavement. How does that show up in my business today? People are not having those conversations, and I want to create spaces for people to be able to have open dialogues about those types of conversations. One of the reasons why I have a workshop coming up on the 27th of June this year, and it's called The Mother Wound and Your Money. And the first time I started talking about this stuff, people were like, wow, I never really looked at it within that context. It's because I know just from my own personal experience and from working with clients and for coaching people that the mother wound has a huge impact on our ability to receive it. When there's a mother wound, there's also a receiving wound, there's a shame wound. So it makes it difficult for us to be able to really stand in our power as business owners, as wellness professionals, but we're not having conversations about these root wounds that we have that prevent us from really being prosperous, and we need to be having those conversations. So these are the reasons why I talk so passionately about the things that I talk about, because these are things that are not being articulated in the way that helps us to understand why we engage in certain types of behaviors. So when we talk about perfectionism, when we talk about overworking, when we talk about hiding and all of that, there are different reasons for different people why they do that. But when I can articulate it specifically within the context of, oh my gosh, I've got a mother wound and this is the reason why I hide, it takes the conversation to a different level. And people sit up and go, oh, and I've seen it on people's faces when I start talking about it, they go, oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah, this makes so much sense, you know? So this again, this is the reason why I do this. If you're interested actually in joining me for the workshop on the 27th of June, there's two parts. There's a full day session on the 27th of June, and then there's a follow-up session on the 11th of July. Okay, so if you go to my website, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. You'll find all of the details about where you can access and find out more about this Mother Wound End Your Money workshop there. Okay, so the last part that I want to talk about that's really linked to hiding, the way that you hide at work is through people pleasing. Okay, and this is where the things like the undercharging, underpricing comes in. And this is a huge topic. This is a huge topic that I work with people that really, really struggle with it. And I get it, I've been there. It's that thing of how can you create a sustainable business for yourself so that you can pay your bills and whatever, but also how can you keep yourself accessible to people? How can you make the work that you do accessible for people so people can come and have their sessions or whatever, and you're not feeling like you're kind of exploiting people or whatever. It's a difficult conversation because there is that stigma around, well, who do you think you are? Why are you charging that amount of money and all the rest of it? And people can be quite judgmental, especially as therapists and wellness professionals. Like somehow we're supposed to carry the weight of carrying people and do it on, do it always do it on a budget or do it for free. Supposed to do it in service for our community because our community is in crisis around wellness and stuff like that. But that, and you have to figure out for yourself what that means for you. But I think having the conversation around, you know, why we under earn, why we underprice, why we undercharge, all of that kind of stuff. And also again, linking it to the mother wound. Again, it's that conversation around worthiness. Be feeling unworthy. This is driven by shame, driven by guilt. A lot of our pricing and our stuff like that can be driven by shame and guilt, because we don't feel worthy of doing what we're doing. So we think that, we get our worth from supporting people, but we're not always honest with ourselves about what we actually need to sustain ourselves. And so our pricing suffers and, we can end up burnt out and resentful again because we're not doing the work that we need. We're not exploring what we need to be doing in our business in order for it to be sustainable for us. And there are ways around it. I remember I did the keynote for the Black and Asian Therapists Network last year, and that was one of the questions that came up. How do you price your services in a way that is going to make it sustainable for you and also, so that people can come and have therapy because therapy is expensive, but it's expensive to do the training. It's expensive to have supervision. It's expensive to do the trainings, it's expensive it's expensive. And actually, as a trauma therapist myself, it's also expensive at an energetic level. So, I'm not one of these therapists where I can sit down and do 30, 40 clients a week. I'm not that therapist because it would just tax my system. I have to be very, very mindful of the amount of therapists, the amount of clients I can see per week, so that I can take care of myself and I can make sure that I'm present for my clients, because I'm not going to be present for my clients if I'm doing 30 clients a week. That's me. I know my system. Might be okay for some others, but I know for me, I can't be doing, 30 clients. And the reasons why people come and see me is primarily doing trauma work, and my system can't do loads and loads of clients like that, which is why I do group work, workshops, all that kind of stuff as well, speaking, writing. That's the reason why I do those things as extra income streams, that because that stuff helps me to sustain what I'm doing. Okay. So yeah, so just I mean I say all of that to just to remind you as well that this people pleasing part of us that thinks that we need to be, somehow that we need to be martyrs of society. We need to explore and understand those parts of ourselves, not kind of beating ourselves up or shaming ourselves for doing that, because again, those parts of us, again, they helped us survive. They helped us survive, especially if there is mother wound stuff going on. Those parts of us helped us survive the relationship with our mothers. And again, that people pleasing thing is taken into the workplace and shows up as under earning, underpricing, under being. Okay, because we obviously want to support people, but what we've learned from the relationship with our mothers, from our mother wound, that in order to be valued, in order to stay in relationship, we have to somehow abandon ourselves. So the work is really for us to really be honest with ourselves and to take the time to explore, what our hiding is. I've given you four examples of what hiding looks like in the workplace, and how do you relate to that? Do you relate? Does it make sense? Are there anything else that you do that you think, should be added to that list? But it's really important for us to be honest about the ways that we hide at work and why we do it, because there are protective reasons why we do what we do, and our nervous system is going to respond to that. Okay. If visibility is really painful, if it's really activating, if it feels unsafe for whatever reason, then our nervous system is going to respond to that. And we are going to hide as a protective mechanism. So if we're wellness professionals, we have to then really be willing to ask ourselves then, how can we be more visible in our business in a way that feels safe? What does that look like? Okay, what does that mean? So, this is where, I'll be talking more about this, about the Mother Wound and Your Money workshop on the 27th of June and the 11th of April as a follow-up session. So if you're interested in joining me for any of those things, you can click the link in my bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. If you've got any questions about anything that I've shared today, or you've got any reflections or anything that came up for you around that, you can email me at info@yardofgreatness.com. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you found this session helpful, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.